This is Kate Swoboda, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, director of the Courageous Living Coach certification at TeamCLCC.com, and author of the book, The Courage Habit, which is available at booksellers and at Amazon. The Your Courageous Life podcast is all about going after what you want and creating and living a more courageous, emotionally resilient life. Might drop a couple of F-bombs, so maybe don't listen with your kids in the backseat of the car. And here we go with today's episode. Hey, everybody. Yay! Another week, another podcast episode. And this week we are talking all about learning to trust your intuition. It's kind of a big topic, right? And if you're somebody who feels like you don't totally know how to trust your intuition, and of course, if you're somebody who feels like, well, I think I know, but hey, I'm always open to hearing a little bit more, then today's podcast is hopefully going to shed some light on how you can learn, like as a skill set, to trust your intuition. And to illustrate some of the things, because obviously I think people can learn how to trust their intuition in different ways. We all have different processes or processes if we are in Canada, right? But I'm going to tell a little bit about how I arrived at a place of learning to trust my intuition. And it's kind of one of the messiest life stories that maybe I've ever had. And it starts with one of those train wreck guys that you date in your early 20s. Some of us are listening to this today, I'm sure, going, my early 20s, I dated that person in my 30s and in my 40s. And, I know how that goes. Thankfully not anymore because I'm very happily married. But man, oh man, to find my way to the person that I'm with now and to have the ability to have that discernment that he's a good partner for me, I had to kiss a few frogs, more than a few. And there was one in particular who really takes the cake. And for as hard as that situation was, it also taught me more about learning to trust my intuition than anything else ever has. So I'm in my 20s, I'm in college, I live in a dorm, and I meet this guy. And he is, charming and always up for having a good time, very flirtatious right away, and yeah. It's not that all people who are charming and flirtatious right away are bad people, but I definitely would say I had to learn in hindsight that when I looked back, I went, that's pretty interesting that from the get-go, someone was basically acting like I was the bee's knees. It was like really, really early on that he was talking about things we would do in the future, concerts we would go to, trips we would take. Like I barely met this person, and he's already visioning into these like fantastical trips that we'll take. And, he's kind of positioned himself as an entrepreneur who has all of these different businesses going. He's got, he's positioning himself as he's got a lot of money. He's got a nice car. He could, just drop everything if he wanted to and jet me off to some exotic locale and on and on and on. So this is how it basically goes. And also making a lot of comments about really being into me, never met anyone like me before, etc. Now, I knew that he had kind of sort of maybe been interested in some other people that I went to college with. He was a little bit older than all the rest of us. I kind of asked him about that. Like, aren't you kind of dating so-and-so? And he's like, oh no, like she and I just, we kind of talked for a little bit, but it didn't really end up happening. But I would feel this energy whenever I would see the two of them talking. And I would get this sense that maybe something was going on. And he was telling me things about how he was so into me, but he wanted us to keep our relationship under wraps. He didn't want us telling anybody about the relationship because, as he put it, it would be too much drama. Why do we need the drama? If we tell everyone, then there's drama and people have things to say about it. And I remember at the time kind of feeling like, well, I don't understand. Like, what do you mean? Like, even if people did have something to say about it, first of all, my friends, I can't imagine them being anything other than supportive. And second of all, if people did have something to say about it, what's that to us? I mean, we're us, da da da. But okay, went along with what he wanted. And then there was the day. Sometimes well, not sometimes, quite often I'm like, universe, you know what you're doing. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically I was coming down a stairwell, and that stairwell had a window that looked out onto the parking lot. And his car was down in the parking lot with like, it's weird to even imagine. It's like coming down these stairs, there's a window at the bottom of the stairs, and then like right in the view of that window, I'm looking straight into the front seat of his car, where I see him with this other girl making out with her. And I'm sitting here, and it's like the blood is rushing to my face, and I am like, what the hell is going on? And I go outside, and I immediately confront him about it. And of course, we were just sitting in a car. And I mean, I saw them making out, but he's all, no. That's not what you saw. You missaw it. You didn't see it. Well, guess what happens then? My entire body breaks out in hives, like immediately, within an hour of this experience. Sometimes I think about that situation in that relationship, and I think of Oprah. I got to invoke Oprah, right? She's got the little clips. You can find them on YouTube. She's like, first life is going to throw you a pebble, and then it's going to throw you a brick, and then a whole freaking wall is going to fall. Like life is trying to send you the signs that something is wrong here. And I let myself be convinced that I must not have seen what in fact I did see. Even with hives breaking out all over my body, had to go to the doctor, get an antihistamine. Well, I'll make a long story short. The relationship progresses. I keep trying to stay in. He keeps telling me that everything that I'm suspecting, that I'm just paranoid, that I'm wrong. And little things start to emerge. Like, turns out he's not an entrepreneur. He's actually living with his parents. He's like 30 and living with his parents and not paying rent, and not, he brings me over and introduces me to his parents, and his mom's like mad at him for not doing chores. So we basically have a grown adult who's living with his parents, who's not doing chores, and his mom is mad at him, which, I mean, to me, if I'm, in a situation where I need to live with somebody else in their home under their good graces, if they ask me to do a chore, I should be doing that chore, right? Especially if it's your parents. And everything kind of came to a head one night when, after a ton of drama, and I caught him cheating with other people and took him back. Of course, that's how it goes. And everything culminated in him basically ending up getting thrown out of his house and having to come live with me in my dorm room. So he brings all his stuff over to my dorm room, and he's ex-military. And so one of the things he brought over was his gun and ammunition. And I have never shot a gun in my life. I'm not comfortable around them. But, he's ex-military. So I'm like, okay, yeah, he's just storing it. So he's storing it under my bed. And it's not loaded or anything like that, or so he told me. And after enough shenanigans, finally, I say, look, you're going to have to pack up your stuff and leave. This is over the course of months. This is like almost a year of my life going back and forth with this guy, and so much drama. And I had friends who were like, this guy is such bad news and he's hurting you, and I cannot just keep standing by while he does this and hurts you. Like, it's hurting me too much to be standing here while you go through this. So I ask this guy to leave. I say, you're going to have to pack up your stuff. And in the middle of my dorm room, he, gets distraught, and suddenly he can't live without me. And he fishes out the gun, which was in a lockbox. And a gun lockbox, for those who have not seen one, at least for this type of gun, it was a handgun, is like a square box that has a cord through the center of it that winds around the entire box, so that even if you were able to get the top of the box off, you couldn't technically take the gun out because it would get hit by the cord. And I told him to leave, and he pulled out that gun lockbox and went from, I can't live without you and I have to have you, and we have to fix this, please don't break up with me, to I'm going to kill myself, and I'm going to do it in front of you, and you're going to have to watch it. I mean, he said other things that are more graphic than that, but that was pretty bad, obviously. So there I am in the middle of my dorm room, and I start freaking out and crying and begging him not to, and like twisting my own hands up into the cord of the lockbox to try to prevent him from opening it. And I feel very fortunate that the resident assistant of the dorm, her room was right next to mine, and she heard us arguing in the middle of the night and heard me crying and called security, and they came to my dorm room, and they just, like the gun lockbox, blah, 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 got all hidden away and all that. And they didn't realize that he had a gun, and they just simply asked him to leave and assumed that it was like, okay, we're having, a couple having an argument. So they made him leave. And I untangled myself from that relationship, which obviously was a very toxic relationship to be in. But that relationship, man, for as hard as that was, that taught me more about trusting my intuition than any other experience I had had up to that point. And what it taught me was somatic awareness. Somatic, S-O-M-A-T-I-C, somatic awareness, which is the ability to tell what the sensations in your body mean for you. The ability to tell what the sensations in your body mean for you. And when you learn somatic awareness, you learn how to trust your intuition. You learn the difference between the kind of fear that is, oh my God, this is very, very bad and I should not go any farther. And the kind of fear that is, oh my God, this is really, really scary. And oh, I don't know how this is going to go, but I'm going to lean into it. Somatic awareness is how you know the difference between this is against my values and it's hitting me that way on a gut level versus this is uncomfortable for me and I need to traverse the discomfort. Now, I didn't call it somatic awareness in the wake of that relationship. What I referred to it as with other people was the red flag feeling. When I was doing postmortems on that relationship with my girlfriends, I talked about how I felt this red flag feeling. Like whenever this guy was lying to me, there was this curious feeling, which is somatic awareness, and which I would call the red flag feeling. There was this curious feeling that something wasn't right. And I didn't always know what it was, but something wasn't right. It was like I could just feel in my body when I was being told a lie. And there was something about being exposed so many times and having like a good almost year of my life being around someone who, certainly he wasn't always duplicitous. Sometimes he told the truth, but it was uncanny how I developed an ability at the time based on just trying to emotionally survive that relationship. But I developed an uncanny ability to tell when he was telling the truth versus when he was lying. And then, curious thing, I started to notice that I kind of could tell with other people too. Like even other people, I could kind of tell when something was off with them. I could kind of tell when they were fibbing something a little bit, or I wasn't getting all of the story. And I could tell in a way that I had not been able to tell before. And I actually don't know what, in the most clinical, psychological sense, that would be called in terms of, I'm sure there's some term for the ways in which people give off verbal cues or visual cues or tells that they're bluffing, that they're lying, that they're being evasive. And I don't know necessarily how that process works. But I definitely know that part of learning to trust my intuition meant butting up against times when I had ignored my intuition. So I tell that story to get to this, the first big way that you can really learn to start trusting your intuition. Hindsight. I wish that there was some way that I knew of that I could share with you today that was all about learning to trust your intuition so that you would never again be hurt, you know? But as far as I have been able to tell, we learn to trust our intuition based on the times when we did not trust our intuition, when we maybe didn't even know that that was what we needed to do. The times when we ignored the red flag feeling. The times when we felt uncomfortable. The times when we had this weird sense, even though somebody was saying all the right things, that something didn't quite add up, that someone was being evasive. The times when we see that right as we were making a certain decision, we suddenly got sick. The times when we see that right as we were about to do X, Y, and Z, it just felt like every other thing in the world was getting in our way. Admittedly, I know it sounds a little bit woo, but I absolutely believe that there is a sort of sensory awareness that we can start to pick up on if we pay attention to what is happening in our bodies. And if we choose to let that be the thing that guides us. Now, the challenge of this, as you might have already started to think about for yourself, is that, it's like we're going to make some wrong turns. We're going to make some wrong turns. Like if we are mostly learning how to trust our intuition by paying attention to hindsight and going, oh, that feeling I had, that thought that occurred to me, that moment when I was about to do that thing, and then suddenly something just was like, to use a very old-fashioned term, cattywampus. Suddenly things were sideways. Oh, that was my intuition speaking to me, picking up on things. So if we are learning in hindsight that what it is that our intuition is trying to tell us, what gets tricky is that we're going to make some wrong turns, which means that I think another essential skill for learning to trust your intuition is really being the first person in line to step up to the plate and forgive yourself for the times when you didn't trust your intuition. You have a choice before you. And that choice is to beat yourself up for the things that you ignored, for the times when a signal was being sent your way to check on something or to maybe double check or to look further at a situation, or to go, let me do a postmortem. What did I learn here? Because you have no control over how it went, and beating yourself up in the here and now about how you handled it then is not going to actually change what happened then. But deciding right here and right now, I am going to sit down and I'm going to journal about this. Where were all the times, every single little time, when I had a hit that something didn't feel quite right? And you can do this, by the way, with the missed opportunities too. Sometimes we are trying to move in some direction that is new for us, that is outside of our comfort zone. And as we're moving in that direction and moving outside of our comfort zone, we feel afraid. And there are absolutely people I've talked with, and I can think of situations in my own life where I felt afraid. And in hindsight, because hindsight's such a great teacher, I look back and I go, oh, I backed off of that. I didn't go after that opportunity because I was really scared. It wasn't that there was any actual danger. It wasn't that it was the wrong opportunity for me. It was that I made it mean I'm afraid, so I made it mean this is not right. But actually, I was just really scared. I can think of a gazillion stories where I've heard this, where, maybe someone got an opportunity for a speaking gig and they, made it, well, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to prepare for it and everything. And something just doesn't, no, it's not quite right for me. And then in hindsight, they're going, oh, I was just afraid. And people do that in relationships too, when they get afraid. Sometimes some people who are in relationship, they just get afraid. So they start nitpicking over every little thing the person is doing because that's easier than the vulnerability of, wow, I deeply love this person. And I don't always know what to do with how deeply I feel for this person. So again, that willingness to forgive yourself for the things that you ignored when the situation didn't turn out well, or the opportunities you missed, if that's the direction things went with. And then the willingness to do a postmortem, to say, what happened in this situation? What was I feeling? What was the first time that I noticed that something didn't feel right, or that I started to question things, or that I started to go in this other direction? That's the place where you really start to learn about the signals your body is sending to you. That's where you develop that somatic awareness to go, oh, this nervousness is actually a nervous excitement. And that is different than the kind of nervousness that is like, I'm in danger, or, this is not going to turn out well from a like emotional or physical safety perspective. And speaking of a debrief, I mean, you are listening to a life coach here, right? So of course I've got a practice for you, because the life coaches are all about doing something actionable with what you're noticing to evoke these changes, to evoke insight and forward movement in your life, and, more presence and all that good stuff. My invitation to you would be twofold. One, I have another podcast, by the way. You might not know this. I have a few podcasts. Only two currently. The other podcast that I have is called the Craft of Coaching podcast. And that podcast, for the Your Courageous Life audience, the Craft of Coaching podcast might not seem like a fit. And most of the time it's probably not, unless you are a life coach, because the Craft of Coaching podcast is all about, you guessed it, the craft of coaching. But there is an episode that you might find interesting that is related to this, and it's episode 27, and it is about somatic coaching. And in that episode, I talk about the process of somatic coaching and some of the questions that someone might ask if they are practicing somatic coaching with their clients. So it's a craft-driven episode for life coaches, but the everyday person who's not a life coach still might get some benefit out of listening to that episode and, just thinking about some of the questions and maybe doing a little bit of self-coaching. That's one of my favorite things about being a life coach, is that there are all these opportunities for me to apply some of the same processes that my clients are applying to their lives to my own life. The other piece of an exercise that I would invite you into going forward would be to actually make like a good hour, go to a coffee shop, grab a cup of tea, sit down, and write about an experience you had where you were like, that experience went, it was totally FUBAR and I don't even know. And try to set up a timeline. Try to actually dissect, when was the first time that I noticed something didn't feel right? And what was I noticing? And what was I telling myself to talk myself out of what I was noticing? And what was this opportunity when I was presented with two different choices and I went left when I could have gone right, or I went right when I could have gone left? Now, this is not an exercise. So this is why I talked earlier about being willing to forgive yourself for the places where you might not have trusted your intuition fully in the past. This is not an exercise that is just an open door for your critic to come in and tell you how you did it all wrong. Again, that mindset of, I am stepping into the perspective that there is something to learn from this. That was an experience I had. It does not define who I am. And whatever mistakes made were mistakes made. Hey, I didn't trust my intuition. Great. Opportunity to learn. And that's hard and that's humbling. And me saying all of this to you right now on a podcast, I'm saying it from the vantage point of someone who has done that work. And the next time that I make a mistake, because trusting your intuition or failing to and making that mistake is something that we all will do. Even if you're very good at trusting your intuition, we all have places where we lapse. And the next time that I fail to trust my intuition around something, I have no doubt that there will be a part of me that will go into, I feel like I'm not enough, or I'm angry at myself, or why did I have to do that, or grieving some of the consequences that arose from that scenario. So give yourself a lot of human space. But also remember that the opportunity here is for you to learn from your experience. And in learning from your experience, you don't have to repeat it again and again. Speaking of relationships, I've now been married for, I can't even remember how many years, actually. It's been a long time, 14 years or something like that. 15 years, maybe it's going to be 15 years in 2020. I'd have to ask my husband. He's so good at tracking dates. He can tell you any date. Oh yeah, when's the last time we were at that restaurant? He'll be like, he'll think about it. He'll know. So he's good with I remember the date of my anniversary, of course. I just can't remember exactly how many years it's been. But anyway, we've been together all these years. Still love this man like you wouldn't believe. And I can actually think back to moments in our early dating life when I did those gut checks with myself. Because after, Mr. Disaster in my early 20s, I was paying attention. When you have been in the middle of your dorm room and someone is threatening to pull out a gun and hurt themselves, you remember and maybe take a different approach to relationships moving forward, or I did. So I remember the early months of dating him and really doing those gut checks with my body, kind of scanning my body, checking my intuition. Was he trustworthy? Were things adding up? And what I would find over and over is that things did. And it absolutely drives him crazy when, if he's a little bit annoyed with me and I'm like, what's going on? Are you annoyed with me? If he doesn't want to talk about it and he's like, no, I'm not, but I know he's annoyed with me. That's the downside, right? Because on an intuitive level, I know when he's annoyed with me. But, now here it is, this trusting your intuition thing. It comes in handy in your daily life. It's not just how do I trust my intuition about should I write the book or should I quit the job or should I travel the world? It's not always the big stuff. It's also how do I just have a way of being in my life where I feel things, I experience things, and I use what I feel and experience to sort of broaden my awareness of both the possibilities as well as honing in on what the right choice is for me. And those opportunities are everywhere. Postmortems don't have to only be done on the things that went cattywampus, my new favorite word perhaps. They can also be done on the things that went really, really well. Is there a decision that you are incredibly proud of having made? And think about what that decision was. Think about the factors that went into making that decision. Think about the challenges you encountered, even if something turned out well. And how did you feel about those challenges when you were encountering them? Another example that I can give is the example of entrepreneurship. Every salaried job I had ever had never felt like quite the right fit. It always felt like wearing clothing that was just a little too tight, a little too constricted. And longtime listeners of this podcast know that one of my favorite questions is, when you're stuck, if I could have it any way I want it, how would I want it? If I could have it any way I want it, how would I want it? So as I began asking myself that question, what kept coming up over and over and over was that I didn't want to have to work for someone else. Didn't mean that I didn't want to be part of a team. It just meant I didn't want to have to work for someone else. And when I would think about working for myself, I would tap into my somatic awareness and I would feel really excited. I would also feel afraid. What if it didn't work? What would people think? What if I couldn't pay my bills? I would feel like a failure if I tried to launch something and it was a flop. I would also feel afraid, yet I would simultaneously feel this kind of rush, like, oh, but if it did work, it'd be so cool. And I got to tell you, all the things I was afraid of have absolutely come to pass, by the way, with entrepreneurship. People have judged me for what I've done. I have gone through periods where I did not have the money to pay my bills. So, the first couple years of doing the entrepreneurship thing on my own, there were absolutely times where I was like living off of the credit cards to make it all work. Don't advise that, by the way. In case anyone wants to learn from me, I advise keeping your salary job while building your business. It's much less stressful. But there were all sorts of things that I was afraid of, but it was like something in me just felt so lit up by this idea of working for myself. And that's what I would keep returning to over and over and over, that feeling of there's something here for me. And I think that, again, that speaks to an example of somatic awareness. I'm not at all trying to present scenarios today where when you tap into your somatic awareness, life is just peachy keen and you're never afraid. I don't think it works that way, as you know. But I absolutely do think that you can learn how to trust your intuition, how to know that even if you are afraid, that brighter thing that's calling to you, that potential, that possibility, that opportunity, that invitation, that place that you want to stretch into, because it would be amazing to stretch into, even if challenges arise. You can start to recognize what that feels like versus the things that land for you as, oh, I should do that. I kind of don't want to, but I guess I should. Or this feels all wrong. It feels gritchety, like an itchy wool sweater and all wrong, and I don't like it, but okay, I'm just going to live with it. And you deserve to live a life that's far better than just living with it, or shoulds, or obligation. And I meet plenty of people, by the way, who have a sort of intuitive hit that they want to be doing different work, but they don't want entrepreneurship. And one of the joys of running the program that I run, the Courageous Living Coach certification, is, and the coaches that we work with, some of them, they like the idea of not having to do their old work, and then they get into this place where they feel kind of stuck because they don't necessarily want to be an entrepreneurial life coach. And I love seeing the joy they connect to when they end up finding salary jobs that utilize their life coaching skill set. A lot of those are cropping up, especially in the corporate sector, for coaching employees and helping to improve employee productivity and helping employees set goals. And it ends up being this like perfect world of the coaching that they want to do, but without necessarily building out an entrepreneurial business. I bring that up as an example because in those cases with those coaches, I mean, entrepreneurship is what I was called to, but in those cases with those coaches, they kept following their somatic awareness. They kept noticing when something just didn't feel right, and they kept paying attention to where they did and did not feel drawn. All right, that's today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You know you can continue the work and the fun if you want to. Head on over to yourcourageouslife.com/begin and become a Your Courageous Life subscriber, because as soon as you sign up, you get access to an entire library of worksheets and audios and other bonuses. And of course, you'll be receiving more courage in your inbox. And who wouldn't love that? You can learn more about the Courageous Living Coach certification at teamclcc.com. You can get the Courage Habit at your local bookseller, on Amazon, wherever you like. We can even connect on social media. I'm on Facebook at Your Courageous Life. So look for facebook.com/Your Courageous Life. And I'm on Instagram as Kate Courageous. And I'd love to connect with you on Instagram. So here's to you using these courageous tools in your life and creating a real ripple effect of good. And again, thanks so much for listening. I love it that you're here.